He called it the crime of the century. The Sackler family's OxyContin empire that addicted millions of Americans, killed over 500,000 people, and generated $35 billion in profits before anyone stopped them. But here's what they don't want you to know. The Sacklers didn't invent this playbook. They copied it, word for word, strategy for strategy, from a family that did the exact same thing 50 years earlier on an even larger scale. The Sassoon family of the 1800s, Jewish merchants who fled persecution in Baghdad and built the largest drug empire in human history. They didn't sell to street corners or individual addicts. They addicted an entire nation. 12 million Chinese became dependent on their product. The Chinese economy collapsed. 2 wars were fought to protect their business model. And when it was over, when the bodies were counted and the damage was done, they didn't go to prison. They got knighthoods. This isn't ancient history repeating by coincidence. This is the same formula, the same marketing strategies, the same corruption techniques, deployed across 2 centuries with surgical precision. The Sassoons perfected the blueprint for industrial-scale addiction in the 1800s. The Sacklers simply updated it for modern America. Create the product, engineer the dependency, control the medical establishment, buy the regulators. And when people start dying, rebrand as philanthropists and wait for history to forget. But the playbook didn't die with Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy. It's running right now. Antidepressants that create lifelong dependency, ADHD medications that rewire developing brains, benzodiazepines that destroy lives while generating billions. The same families, the same institutions, the same methods. Let me show you how 2 families, separated by 50 years, built identical addiction empires using the exact same playbook, and why understanding their formula is the only way to see what they're doing to you right now. The Sassoon Foundation, Baghdad to Bombay. In 1832, David Sassoon flees Baghdad with his family, not by choice. The local governor is squeezing Jewish merchants for money, threatening imprisonment, confiscation. Worse, David takes his 8 sons and whatever liquid wealth they can carry and looks for a new base of operations. He chooses Bombay, British-controlled India, where the East India Company operates with unlimited authority and zero oversight. It's perfect for what David has in mind. But here's what you need to understand about what David Sassoon was walking into. The British East India Company wasn't a normal business. It was a corporate empire. It had its own army, its own courts, its own laws. It controlled territory larger than Europe and answered only to shareholders in London. And by 1832, the company had discovered the most profitable product in history, opium. The business model was elegant in its brutality. Grow opium in British-controlled India, ship it to China, where it's illegal but demand is infinite. Get millions of Chinese addicted, use the profits to buy Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain for European markets. When the Chinese government tries to stop the trade, the British Navy enforces it with gunboats. This is state-sponsored drug dealing, industrial-scale addiction creation, and David Sassoon sees it as the opportunity of a lifetime. Within 5 years, the Sassoons dominate the trade, not by violence or intimidation, but by applying techniques that the Sacklers would later copy exactly. First, vertical integration. The Sassoons don't just buy and sell opium. They control every stage of production. They finance Indian farmers to grow poppies instead of food. They own the processing facilities where raw opium becomes smokable paste. They operate the ships that carry it to China. They run the warehouses where it's stored. They have exclusive relationships with Chinese distributors. This isn't participation in a market. This is market control. Second, medical legitimization. The Sassoons fund studies showing opium's beneficial effects for various ailments. They cultivate relationships with British doctors who prescribe opium for everything from headaches to depression. They publish pamphlets explaining the scientific basis for opium use. Sound familiar? Third, regulatory capture. David Sassoon becomes a pillar of the British colonial establishment. He funds government projects. He hosts British officials. He provides consulting services to colonial administrators. When regulations threaten the opium trade, Sassoon family input is always considered. The regulators become partners. Fourth, philanthropic cover. The Sassoons build hospitals, schools, and synagogues with opium money. They become known as generous benefactors. When critics point to the source of their wealth, supporters point to the libraries and orphanages they've funded. The blood money becomes respectable. By 1840, the Sassoons are shipping 40,000 chests of opium annually to China. Each chest contains 140 pounds of refined opium. That's 5.6 million pounds of narcotics flooding Chinese ports every year. And this scale keeps growing. But here's the key innovation that the Sacklers would later perfect. The Sassoons don't just sell opium, they create opium culture. They fund opium dens that make the experience social and appealing. They develop marketing materials, showing respectable Chinese using opium for relaxation and socializing. They create delivery systems that make opium convenient and accessible. They're not selling a drug, they're selling a lifestyle. The results are catastrophic for China, but incredibly profitable for the Sassoons. By 1850, an estimated 12 million Chinese are regular opium users. The Chinese economy is hemorrhaging silver to pay for opium. Agricultural productivity collapses as farmers abandon fields for opium dens. The Chinese government tries repeatedly to stop the trade. In 1839, Commissioner Lin Zexu confiscates and destroys 1,400 tons of British opium in Canton. The British response is war. The First Opium War, 1839-1842, is fought explicitly to protect the drug trade. British warships bombard Chinese ports. The treaty that ends the war forces China to pay reparations for the destroyed opium, and opens 5 ports to unrestricted British trade. Opium becomes impossible to stop. The Second Opium War, 1856-1860, happens when China again tries to enforce anti-opium laws. This time, Britain and France together attack Beijing, burn the Summer Palace, and force China to legalize opium completely. 2 wars fought to protect a drug cartel, and the Sassoons profit from both. By 1870, the Sassoon family controls 70% of the opium flowing into China. They're worth hundreds of millions in today's money, and they've established a template that will be copied for the next 150 years. Create dependency, control supply, capture regulators, use violence when necessary. But the most important innovation is still coming: the respectability formula. By 1860, the Sassoon family faces a problem. Public opinion in Britain is turning against the opium trade. Christian missionaries are documenting the destruction in China. British journalists are calling it morally indefensible. Parliament is asking uncomfortable questions. The Sassoons need to transform from drug dealers into respectable businessmen, and they develop a strategy that every subsequent addiction empire will copy. First, diversification. The Sassoons use opium profits to invest in legitimate businesses: textiles, banking, real estate, shipping. By 1870, they can claim their wealth comes from diverse commercial interests, not just opium. Second, geographic separation. The Sassoons move their families to England while maintaining business operations in Asia. Physical distance from the addiction and death makes the wealth seem cleaner. Third, institutional capture. David Sassoon's sons marry into British high society. They buy country estates. They join exclusive clubs. They become integrated into the British establishment, to the point where attacking them becomes socially unacceptable. Fourth, philanthropic laundering. The Sassoons fund hospitals, universities, and museums with opium money, but they don't just donate anonymously. They insist on naming rights. Sassoon libraries, Sassoon hospitals, Sassoon schools. The buildings become monuments to their generosity, not their crimes. Fifth, historical revision. The Sassoons fund historians and biographers who present their story as one of immigrant success and commercial innovation. The opium trade becomes a footnote mentioned briefly, if at all. By 1890, the Sassoon family are pillars of British society. Albert Sassoon receives a knighthood in 1872. He becomes the first Jew granted the freedom of the City of London. His son Edward inherits a baronetcy and becomes a member of Parliament. 3 generations from drug dealers to aristocracy. And the formula is documented in their correspondence, their business records, their philanthropic activities. It's a playbook, and 100 years later, the Sacklers will follow it exactly. The Sackler Blueprint, Brooklyn to America. 1952, Arthur Sackler is a young psychiatrist in Brooklyn with big ambitions and no family money. But he has something more valuable than inherited wealth. He has a plan. Arthur studies the pharmaceutical industry and sees an opportunity that reminds anyone familiar with history of 19th century opium marketing. Doctors control access to powerful drugs, but they make prescribing decisions based on limited information from pharmaceutical companies. Control the information, control the prescribing, control the prescribing, control the prescribing, control the profits.
Arthur starts a medical advertising agency, McAdams, not to sell products directly, but to sell doctors on products. And he applies marketing techniques that haven't been used in medicine before.
Emotional manipulation, false urgency, selective research presentation, celebrity endorsements from respected physicians. This is the Sassoon model, updated for American medicine. Instead of marketing opium to Chinese users, Arthur is marketing pharmaceuticals to American doctors who will prescribe them to patients. The first major success is Valium, developed by Roche but marketed by Arthur's agency. Arthur creates advertising campaigns that present Valium as a solution for everyday anxiety, work stress, and relationship problems. Valium isn't marketed as a powerful psychiatric medication for severe conditions. It's marketed as a lifestyle enhancer for normal people facing normal challenges. Sound familiar? By 1978, Valium is the most prescribed drug in America. 2.3 billion pills sold annually. And Arthur Sackler has established the template for pharmaceutical marketing that every subsequent addiction empire will follow. Create medical justifications for recreational use. Market to healthy people experiencing normal life stress. Make the drug seem safe and routine. But Arthur is just warming up. In 1952, Arthur's brothers Mortimer and Raymond purchase a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick. It's a sleepy operation making laxatives and antiseptics. But the Sacklers have bigger plans. They're going to create the most addictive painkiller in history and market it as non-addictive. The development of OxyContin begins in the 1980s. Purdue scientists know they're creating an extremely powerful opioid. Internal documents, later revealed in lawsuits, show company executives calling it superheroin and discussing its addiction potential. But instead of seeing addiction as a problem to solve, they see it as a market to exploit. This is the key insight that connects the Sacklers to the Sassoons. Addiction isn't a side effect of their product. Addiction is their business model. The Sacklers developed marketing strategies that the Sassoons would recognize immediately. First, medical legitimization. The Sacklers fund research showing OxyContin's effectiveness for various pain conditions. They cultivate relationships with pain specialists who become advocates for aggressive opioid prescribing. They create treatment guidelines that recommend opioids as first-line therapy for conditions that were previously managed without drugs. Second, regulatory capture. The Sacklers develop close relationships with FDA officials. They provide consulting fees, research grants, and job opportunities to regulators who approve their products and marketing claims. When the FDA approves OxyContin in 1995, the label claims it has a low abuse potential because of its time-release formulation. This is false. Internal Purdue research shows the time-release mechanism is easily defeated, making the drug highly abusable. But the FDA approval gives the Sacklers exactly what they need: official government endorsement of their addiction machine. Third, distribution control. The Sacklers don't just manufacture OxyContin, they control its distribution through pharmaceutical wholesalers, who are financially incentivized to push volume, not monitor abuse. When pharmacies order suspicious quantities, the distributors ship anyway. When doctors prescribe dangerously high doses, the system continues supplying them. This is vertical integration, updated for modern pharmacy chains. Fourth, cultural normalization. Sacklers create marketing campaigns that present opioid use as normal and necessary. They fund patient advocacy groups that push for pain as the fifth vital sign policies in hospitals. They're not selling a dangerous narcotic, they're selling relief from suffering. The results are catastrophic for America, but incredibly profitable for the Sacklers. By 2010, OxyContin generates $3 billion in annual revenue. By 2015, over 2 million Americans are addicted to prescription opioids. And just like the Sassoons 50 years earlier, the Sacklers use their drug profits to buy respectability. The laundering machine. By 2000, the Sacklers face the same problem the Sassoons faced in 1860. Public criticism is mounting. Journalists are documenting OxyContin addiction. Government officials are asking uncomfortable questions. The Sacklers deploy the exact same respectability formula. The Sassoons perfected first diversification. The Sacklers use Purdue profits to invest in legitimate businesses, art galleries, pharmaceutical research, international ventures. By 2010, they can claim their wealth comes from diverse business interests, not just OxyContin. Second, geographic separation. The Sacklers move operations offshore while maintaining residences in New York and London. The addiction and death in American communities becomes physically distant from their daily lives. Third, institutional capture. The Sacklers marry into established American families. They join prestigious boards. They become integrated into elite circles where attacking them becomes professionally costly. Fourth, philanthropic laundering. This is where the Sackler formula reaches perfection. They don't just donate to hospitals and museums. They demand naming rights for their donations. The Sackler Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian. The Sackler Institute at Columbia University. Sackler Centers at medical schools across America. Their name becomes synonymous with culture, education, and medical research, not addiction and death. Fifth, historical revision. The Sacklers fund medical conferences, research institutions, and academic programs that present their story as one of pharmaceutical innovation and pain management advancement. The opioid epidemic becomes a regrettable side effect of necessary medical progress, not the intended outcome of a deliberate business strategy. By 2015, the Sackler family controls a $13 billion fortune, and their name adorns institutions across America and Europe. They're celebrated as medical innovators and cultural patrons. Meanwhile, OxyContin addiction has created a heroin epidemic that kills 70,000 Americans annually. Same formula, same result, same respectability. But there's one difference between the Sassoons and the Sacklers. The internet exists now, and the evidence of their crimes is harder to erase. The evidence trail. What makes the Sackler case different from the Sassoon precedent is documentation. In the 19th century, the Sassoons could destroy incriminating documents, control historical narratives, and rely on time to obscure their crimes. The Sacklers operated in an era of electronic communications, regulatory filings, and legal discovery. When states and families sued Purdue Pharma, internal documents became public record. And those documents reveal a business strategy identical to the Sassoon opium formula. A 1996 Purdue memo describes OxyContin's target market as patients using opioids for recreational purposes, not medical purposes. Recreation. A 201 internal presentation shows Purdue executives celebrating states with the highest OxyContin addiction rates as their most successful markets. A 2007 email from Richard Sackler, company president, refers to OxyContin addicts as reckless criminals, while simultaneously developing marketing strategies to increase their drug consumption. These aren't the communications of people accidentally creating addiction. These are the communications of people deliberately exploiting addiction for profit. The same mindset visible in Sassoon family letters about Chinese opium users in the 1840s, but the most revealing document is a 2014 internal strategy memo titled Project Tango. The plan describes how to expand OxyContin marketing to capture more patients by targeting specific demographic groups with customized addiction messages. Young people with sports injuries, elderly people with chronic pain, veterans with PTSD. Each group receives tailored marketing designed to maximize drug consumption and minimize resistance to long-term use. This is precision addiction marketing. The Sassoons targeted an entire nation. The Sacklers targeted specific vulnerable populations with surgical accuracy. And it worked. Between 1999 and 2019, over 500,000 Americans died from overdoses linked to prescription opioids that began with OxyContin or similar drugs marketed using Sackler techniques. 500,000 deaths from one family's business model. The Chinese opium epidemic killed an estimated 12 million people over 50 years. The American opioid epidemic has killed 500,000 in 20 years and continues accelerating. Same formula. Modern efficiency. The current playbook. But here's what should terrify you about this story. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy in 2019. Sacklers paid $4.5 billion in settlements. Museums removed the Sackler name from their galleries. Justice served. Right? Wrong. The playbook didn't die with Purdue. It evolved. The same pharmaceutical companies that learned from the Sackler model are now applying it to different drug classes with the same addiction potential but better legal protection. Antidepressants are now prescribed to 13% of Americans, including children as young as 12. The drugs create physical dependency that requires lifelong use. Withdrawal symptoms are often worse than the original condition, but they're not classified as addictive because addiction implies recreational use. Technical distinctions that allow the same business model with different terminology. The ADHD medications like Adderall are methamphetamine compounds prescribed to millions of children. Long-term use rewrites brain chemistry, creating permanent dependency, but it's called treatment, not addiction. Benzodiazepines like Xanax and Klonopin create physical dependency faster than heroin. Withdrawal can cause seizures and death, but they're prescribed for normal anxiety that was previously managed without drugs. Each of these drug classes follows the Sackler playbook. Exactly. Medical legitimization through funded research, regulatory capture through industry-funded agencies, cultural normalization through patient advocacy groups, distribution control through pharmacy benefit managers, and when problems emerge, the same philanthropic laundering and historical revision. Johnson & Johnson, facing billions in opioid settlements, funds cancer research centers. Pfizer caught manipulating antidepressant trial data, endows medical schools. Eli Lilly, prosecuted for illegal marketing practices, sponsors mental health awareness campaigns. The names on the buildings change, the formula doesn't. The news assumes that the most sophisticated current application of the addiction empire formula isn't happening in traditional pharmaceuticals. It's happening in digital drugs. Social media platforms use addiction neuroscience to create psychological dependency that generates revenue through attention harvesting. The business model is identical to opium and OxyContin: create dependency, maximize consumption, profit from compulsive use. Facebook's internal research revealed in congressional hearings shows the company knew its algorithms were creating depression and anxiety in teenage users. Instead of addressing the problem, they used the research to make their products more addictive. TikTok deploys variable reward schedules that trigger dopamine responses identical to gambling addiction. The algorithm is designed to create compulsive checking behavior that maximizes screen time and ad revenue. Instagram studies show the platform increases body dysmorphia and self-harm behavior in young women. Internal documents reveal executives celebrating these engagement metrics as business successes. This is the Sackler playbook, applied to digital platforms. Create products that cause psychological harm, fund research that minimizes the harm, capture regulators who might limit the business model, use profits to buy cultural legitimacy. Mark Zuckerberg funds hospitals and schools. Jack Dorsey sponsors meditation research. They're using social media profits to buy the same respectability the Sassoons purchased with opium money and the Sacklers bought with OxyContin revenue. And it's working. Despite overwhelming evidence that social media platforms deliberately create addiction and psychological harm, they continue operating with minimal regulation. The addiction empire has gone digital. The pattern recognition, understanding the Sassoon-Sackler playbook, gives you the ability to recognize addiction empires before they complete their respectability transformation. Look for these warning signs. Products that create dependency marketed as medical or psychological necessities. Research funded by product manufacturers that downplays addiction potential. Regulatory agencies with financial relationships to the industries they oversee. Philanthropic campaigns by companies facing public criticism. Historical narratives that present harmful products as beneficial innovations. Every addiction empire follows this sequence. Create dependency, control information, capture regulators, buy respectability, rewrite history. The Sassoons and Sacklers perfected the formula. Their successors are applying it to new products and new markets. Prescription antidepressants, social media platforms, online gambling, processed food, engineered for overconsumption, video games designed to trigger compulsive spending. Each industry uses identical techniques: dependency creation, medical legitimization, regulatory capture, cultural normalization, philanthropic laundering. And each industry will follow the same trajectory: massive profits during the expansion phase, public criticism when the damage becomes visible, legal settlements that represent a fraction of total revenue, philanthropic campaigns to rehabilitate reputations. The formula works because it exploits fundamental human weaknesses: the desire to trust medical authorities, the tendency to normalize profitable behaviors, the willingness to forget historical crimes in exchange for current benefits. The Sassoons built libraries with opium money. The Sacklers funded medical research with OxyContin profits. Today's addiction empires will fund climate research, space exploration, and poverty reduction with digital addiction revenue. The buildings will remain. The addiction will be forgotten. The playbook will be ready for the next product, the next market, the next generation of victims. The Sassoon-Sackler legacy, two families separated by 150 years, created identical addiction empires using the same business model, the same marketing techniques, the same respectability strategies. The Sassoons addicted 12 million Chinese to opium and used the profits to buy British aristocracy. Sacklers addicted 2 million Americans to OxyContin and used the profits to buy cultural legitimacy. Both families transformed from drug dealers into respected philanthropists within one generation. Both left behind buildings bearing their names and historical narratives that minimized their crimes. And both established formulas that continue generating addiction and profit long after their personal involvement ended. The Sassoon playbook created the modern pharmaceutical industry's marketing model. The Sackler playbook created the template for digital addiction platforms. Every current addiction empire uses techniques pioneered by these two families. The products change, the delivery mechanisms evolve, the target populations shift, but the fundamental formula remains constant. Create dependency, control information, capture regulators, buy respectability, rewrite history. Understanding this pattern is the only way to recognize addiction empires before they complete their transformation from criminal enterprises into respectable institutions. The next Sassoons are already operating. The next Sacklers are already building their empire. And they're counting on you, not recognizing the pattern until it's too late to stop them. The playbook is public record now. The question is whether anyone will use that knowledge to prevent the next mass addiction epidemic. History suggests they won't. The profits are too large, the techniques too refined, the human capacity for forgetting too reliable. But the evidence is documented now. The pattern is visible, and maybe for the first time in 2,000 years, the next addiction empire can be stopped before it destroys another generation. Maybe.